The inaugural season of Overwatch Champion Series is officially in the history books. The new era of Overwatch esports is off the ground running, and today I'm going to give you my honest opinion of what I thought of the first run-through of OWCS, including all the ups and downs. Before discussing the season as a whole, just knowing how recently it was, let's start with a brief review and my thoughts on the playoffs. First and foremost, a big congratulations is in order for Team Falcons. They are your first ever Overwatch Champion Series World Champs, and this is a big W, just seeing that a lot of their players and even their staff needed this for the sake of their legacy. It goes without saying that multiple players on this squad and even the coach received lots of criticisms throughout the last handful of years for being washed, for never being able to get it done, for choking in the big games. We've heard it all, not to mention the struggles this team went through, starting the year off as overwhelming favorites, always to play little brother to Crazy Raccoon, always to choke in the big tournaments when the lights were at their brightest. All of that was able to vanish in an instant because they executed when it truly mattered. They barely lost any maps throughout the entire playoffs. It looked easy out there for them. They finally looked comfortable and confident out there, and I couldn't be happier for those guys, because individually it means a lot to a bunch of them. Let's start with the biggest player of all in this instance, the star of Overwatch esports the last handful of years, aka Proper. This dude's been trying to chase a ring for years now, ever since he joined Overwatch League. That was the next big thing. Can he get there? Can he actually win and maximize that potential? And the answer always seemed to be no. He got so freaking close in 2022, but no cigar, and then we know what happened in 23, and for a while, people were thinking maybe this would be the last season for Proper. He was contemplating retirement on more than one occasion because of all the losing. His mindset was through the absolute dumpster, but when it mattered, he was able to play super well in the last month or so, and he was able to finally get that ring. His first major championship since playing in Overwatch Contenders, and obviously playing in this means a lot more than in Tier 2. But he sure as hell isn't the only one that gets a meaningful victory out of this. You think about Fielder and Chio. They were already in the conversation as one of the greatest backlines of all time, thanks to their success they had on the Dallas Fuel, and even though they came up short, a dominant year in Atlanta, and now they're back on top again after a year of failure. I know that Chio's been really pissed about losing, so it's cool to see him get back in the win column. He picked up Juno, did a good enough job, and then there's Fielder, who, was such a stable presence on Brig throughout. Every time he plays that hero, good things seem to happen, so good on him for continuing that and showing that he definitely is one of the greatest flex supports of all time. Even though he didn't play that much, Happy finally got a ring after years and years of grinding. How about Hanbin and Smurf, both adding another title to their resumes? They might be the two greatest tank players of all time, now that they have 3 and 2 rings. Smurf, I might consider the #1 tank at this point for sure. A lot of people already did, but 3 championships is hard to argue with. Unless you count Rascal, who won 1 title as an assistant coach on the Dallas Fuel, Smurf is the first ever pure player to win 3 different major championships. Lots of great stuff going on for multiple people's legacies. Some people are getting their first rings like Proper and Stalker. You have people going up to 2, someone going up to 3. Krusty technically goes up to 3 rings as well in this instance. And that's another guy who's received heavy, super heavy criticism, especially the last couple of years. So many people saying he's a fraud. You can't call him the GOAT coach anymore. Well, how about that? He goes out there after all these months of people talking trash about him, and his team ends up being the best one in the playoffs by far. Great stuff for him, finally getting back on top since the Shock era. 3 titles now for one of the greatest coaches of all time. He needed this badly, just knowing the criticisms that surrounded him, and a lot of the blame that he was putting on himself in general. Big congrats to Team Falcons overall. I'm happy for those guys. We went full circle where we started with them being the favorites at the beginning of this year, or at least most people, and that's how it ended. Honestly, when you think about it, in general, with some of the top teams, that's how it went. It was kind of, for most people, I'd say you put Falcons 1, then Crazy Raccoon 2, and then a lot of people would argue Toronto Defiant were 3, and that's how the order went for the top 3 in the playoffs. Full circle. In terms of how I feel about these playoffs in general, I'll be straight up honest with you. I did not enjoy them all that much. I think most people would be in that boat, as not only was the finals anticlimactic, but in general, not a lot of close games. A whole lot of 3-0s across the board. There was only 1 game that went the freaking distance. Well, I guess 2. if you want to count that first round game with Falcons and Twisted Minds, but you know what I mean. In like a full-on first to 3 or more series, there was only one intense game that went down to the wire with Toronto and Twisted Minds. There were blowouts across the board, man, and this meta was garbage. Mauga makes everything boring. He's one of the most boring tanks you can watch, and for whatever reason, Reaper is always inevitable in these major Overwatch esports playoffs recently. The 2022 OWL playoffs, 2019, and now he's back again. It's like every other year, somehow this guy ends up being relevant. I understand his synergy with this composition was just really good, but damn, it sucks to always see him sticking around. I was cool with Echo, but Brig Juno wasn't that fun either, especially because, again, I stand by the fact that it felt like a lot of teams didn't know what they were doing. I don't know, man. Not a great meta, not very entertaining at all. There wasn't that much hype or emotion around this tournament. I mean, the LAN event itself was nice. I thought they did a great job of hosting in Stockholm, Sweden, but there just wasn't enough hype for my liking. The production was great, but that's kind of where it ends, just because these games weren't all that good, and this meta was pretty damn sleeper. Like, I want to say there's a lot to talk about, but there's just not. Falcons were just clearly superior. This is one of the most dominant playoffs we've seen in quite some time. They only lost 2 maps the entire time, man. What else is there to say? I guess we could start by saying it's a rough ending for Crazy Raccoon. A lot of people are probably really disappointed with how they performed in these playoffs. But honestly, at the end of the day, for me, it's not all that shocking, and I can't even blame them that much. It is kind of sad that they fizzled out at the end, but the fact is they did not get a meta that suited them whatsoever. They need that speedy play, and like Mauga was like the one comp they weren't elite on. A lot of teams could push them, like we saw, I think Zeta Division and Falcons in the past do it, although at least then they could still lock Lip on a hard hit scan. They didn't have that here, and that was a big problem. Not to say that Lip played horribly on Reaper all the time, but obviously that is not his strong suit. But he's certainly not the only one suffering, right? He's saying he needs to show his diverse hero pool to get max value. He was good on Echo, but clearly outclassed by Stalker. You think about Shu, how he just wasn't the greatest Juno player in the world. He made a lot of mistakes throughout the playoffs. He needs those carry-oriented supports like Bap and Ana and even a Kiriko. Didn't have access to that for the most part. Junbin, I mean, it's all about forcing the non-Mauga. That's what gave them a lot of success against Falcons the last time when we were in this setup in Dallas, but they couldn't get away with it this time. No Wrecking Ball, no Winston for the most part, stuck on Mauga, which just didn't benefit this team whatsoever in terms of how they like to play with their style. And I mean, come on, it's hard to be that dominant for 8 months straight. Just always winning, it's hard to do something like that, and they ran out of gas at the very end in a meta that just didn't benefit them as much as the other ones. This is like the one that they didn't need. Under most other circumstances, they probably would have been fine, but they got screwed over at the last second, and they weren't able to prepare in time. But honestly, they should feel damn proud of how they played this season. The worst they ever did in any tournament was second place. They barely lost any games the entire season, and they have a bright future ahead of themselves if they choose to stick together. If not, they can still feel pretty proud of how things went. The only thing I really feel bad about in this instance is Lip, as if he had won this championship, the GOAT conversation's probably just over if he gets to ring number 2. With how he's played since he emerged onto the scene in 2020, this really would have sealed the deal. I mean, most people already think he's the GOAT anyway, but at that point, it's really a GG. But, hey, second place ain't too bad. It kind of sucks to see him fall short like he has with Atlanta in World Cup, but you can't win them all, and I'm sure he'll be back next year. To give some thoughts on some of the other big themes from this tournament, I mean, Toronto didn't disappoint for once. They got third place. Not that they stood a chance against the Korean teams, but hey, making it there is good. That's what they were supposed to do. Good job, guys. Then I'd say you probably have to think about EU. That was another big theme throughout this tournament. How disappointing was this region, man? They were clearly better than NA this entire season, but in the playoffs, they were dreadful to watch. I mean, some of the sloppiest play came from those teams. Twisted Minds was the only one that looked respectable out there. I mean, what the hell, man? The worst team on paper in EU was the one that did the best. Twisted Minds were actually a formidable foe. They took Toronto the distance. They took Team Falcons to a map 3. Not that the other 2 maps were all that close, but they still took them the distance, technically. They beat Space Station. Everybody else looked pitiful, man. Quartz just carried this region on his back. He was a superstar, and I hope he gets the pay and the recognition he deserves from this tournament because, man, I'm sure his back is hurting from how crazy he played. On the other side of the coin, though, how about NA, baby? NRG and Nightmare got some pretty impressive wins in this tournament alongside Toronto Defiant. NA on top by a country mile this go-around. Nightmare were able to get a clean win over Space Station, which was one of the bigger upsets, I'd say, of this tournament on paper. And NRG were able to get top 4, and they were clearly seen as the worst, if not the second worst team in this tournament by most people, I'd argue. And they were probably one of the most fun teams, if not the most fun team to watch. This team went on another miracle run after a year of being irrelevant last year with this new core, and they did it through their own unique style. By playing the Junker Queen, by breaking out the Sombra. Very different look from them. That was something they felt comfortable on, and I'm glad they did something different. I think that's part of the problem with how these playoffs went. Outside of there not being the energy, it's just that this meta sucked. It's not like some of the other must-have mirrors where at least there's a higher skill ceiling. A lot of those heroes were just boring to watch, so NRG brought some needed life, and I'm very happy with how they played. They really turned it up when it mattered, and they were super well-practiced, well-coached, and well-disciplined. But yeah, in general, playoffs, not too good. This was probably one of the worst playoffs I have ever watched since seriously getting into Overwatch esports. Not all that much excitement to go around, to be honest with you, and I thought the level of play was pretty bad, below average compared to some previous Overwatch esports majors that we've witnessed, even compared to Dallas. It just wasn't there. There was so much confusion going on. There was a lot of weird play going on with the macro, not to mention the ult management was absolutely awful, even from the top level teams. It felt like nobody knew what they were doing out there. I hated the mismanagement of the ult. It was just dreadful to watch. I mean, it just pissed you off more, just because this meta was already terrible to begin with. I wasn't happy with that. I felt like the quality of play went down compared to some of the other tournaments. Not happy about that at all. A pretty anticlimactic end to the season, but hey, what can you do? That's the devs' faults for making Malga as good as he is. Whatever. We move on. It's going to be a short off-season anyway, so we can get that sour taste out of our mouths pretty quickly. So that's my general thoughts on the playoffs. Now I'm going to transition to some of my overall feelings on the first season of OWCS, and I'll straight up say there are things I liked about it and some things I definitely did not like about it. Let me start with the bright side. I think in terms of positives, there were quite a few of them. I enjoyed being able to see more players get their time on the stage, get their time to shine. I'm liking this whole open ecosystem thing. It brings a lot of life, and it gives you a lot of interesting storylines that are going to appear throughout the entirety of the year. They did great with that, and it seems like they're going to work towards making even more of that possible next year. So good on them for that. I think this was big. We didn't have to worry so much about these really strict restrictions. A lot of players who had been wanting to play for years finally got their chance. We got to see streamers as well, which could provide for some small entertainment for a while. It was good stuff all around. Something else I liked is how they gave proper attention to a bunch of the main regions. I'd like for them to do a better job with a couple of them. We can get to that later, but I thought that NA, Korea, and Europe all kind of got their own love, and they all got their own emphasis and their tournaments throughout the years, which I thought was good. They did a good job with the world building, and if you don't even want to call it that, kind of feels like an anime at this point when I say it like that, but you get what I mean. A good job of building up the story and hyping up both old and new players as well. All of that was pretty well executed. In my opinion, everyone running the content behind the scenes did really, really good. Whether it be with the POVs from OBS Sojourn, constantly uploading those, or the social media team, I love how they kind of microscoped in on certain players and teams and their stories. It made things feel more special. They always reminded us of their legacies and certain points in history, which was cool, never forgetting the past. And I like the emphasis they put on some of the new names, like with Citrus Nation, for example, and how their special story kind of came out of nowhere. Stuff like that just enhanced the experience, and I'm hoping they do even more of that in the future. Something else I thoroughly enjoyed was the number of tournaments we got throughout the year. I liked how Korea had a couple of high-stakes tournaments. I liked how NA and EU had like 4 as well. And on top of it all, we got those international events, which were good. I'm hoping more come in the future. They already announced it is, but I'm hoping it goes even beyond that. I thought that both Dallas and Stockholm had their own bright points, and I enjoyed seeing a LAN not only in US, but also in EU for the first time. Just to rattle off some other ideas, I like how they were less strict with allowing for people to stream their stuff. A lot of people were able to do that on Twitch. We got more creators involved. They even participated in the tournaments. Like I said before, all of that was good. It gave more people in the community a chance to either grow with their respective channels and brands, or just finally be a part of it after wanting to for a long time. It's good to have reliable faces within the community to kind of represent us and to give us some light. So I'm glad they were able to make those proper changes and do everything in their power to involve them in events. And while we're about to get into the criticisms, I have to say, for what it's worth, I think the people behind the scenes running OWCS did a pretty good job. You have to think about it from their point of view. They're literally starting from ground zero. They're working this back up from the ground up to try and give our esports ecosystem the spark of life that it needs to survive and thrive. We're coming off of Overwatch League, which was a letdown in the end, and they've got to figure out a way to improve upon that product, make the changes, listen to the criticisms, and have some bright new minds in there to help pave us towards a different path. And I think they did a good job of that for the most part. I'm going to complain a little bit, but I can't harshly criticize them, just knowing that this is the first year and seeing all of the good that they did. Like, seriously, they deserve a pat on the back. This was not an easy thing to do, and they executed it fairly well. With that said, there are some criticisms that I think need to be addressed and some things that I personally did not like, some of which it seems that Blizzard and the Overwatch Esports Committee have already worked on and have addressed going into Season 2, which is good, but we're still going to talk about it nonetheless. One thing I'd like to see them more clear with is rulings, especially when it comes to player acquisitions, maybe making that a bit more open, as sometimes it was confusing. I know people roasted alexyOWL for what happened with them and MAG, but then we saw something similar play out with Twisted Minds, and it just seemed kind of crazy how if you played in one region, you couldn't for a while in the next. They've got to make that stuff more clear-cut and more flexible to me, because some of these teams genuinely want to compete and get better and bring in more talent, but they're just not allowed to, which is a real bummer to me, and I'm hoping they change that going into the next season. The next thing I didn't love is the formatting, and I think this is part of what made me kind of burn out a little bit towards the end of OWCS. It felt, I don't know, a little plain, a little too repetitive for my liking. Some of it just didn't make all that sense to me, and it seems like they're already going forward with that by having teams automatically qualify for things and for having that relegation promotion system, which is cool. But just thinking about this year and how it affected us, we had to go through the same thing in this endless loop, especially with NA and EU. I don't think Asia was as bad. There's different criticisms for that, but with NA and EU, we just had the same thing where it's like, we're going to go through a Swiss, we're going to go through a meaningless group, then we're going to have the same 3 or 4 teams be relevant throughout the entire thing, with maybe one fun story in between. To me, it just felt like a gigantic waste of time, because honestly, we're just going to see the same teams compete anyway. Why have them go through all of that when we already know they're worthy? It's just dumb. This whole Swiss thing, don't bother. After the qualifiers, they're there. The top teams are going to stay, and if they suck, they can get relegated. That's what they're going to do moving forward, and I'm glad that they're going to try that out. I think it makes the most sense just to avoid some of that boring, repetitive nature that half the people don't even care about and don't even know is being played anyway. We've got to get more into a regular season type of deal. That's what was attractive to a lot of people in Overwatch League back in the day, you know? That was a big mainstay. Being able to see those games consistently on the schedule without having to worry about what's going to happen next month. When is my team playing? How can I watch them? That stuff won't necessarily apply anymore if you have a more fleshed out regular season type of format. I think making things as streamlined as humanly possible, making the access easier, making people understand the schedule easier is going to greatly benefit having a more consistent fan base that can actually show some growth. And like, it goes beyond NA and EU, right? Korea was pretty good, but you think about some of the other Asia regions and how Pacific literally didn't even have any kind of regular season. It was just a straight up tournament bracket, which is insane. They deserve a lot more love than that, and it seems like they're going to have that be a thing moving forward. They're going to have more games to play. Australia will be a thing. Hopefully they add China as well, but it's a start, right? It's something, and it's something that needs to change because some people are Pacific and OCE and Asia only viewers, and they deserve to have that good experience. But honestly, in general, it goes beyond just that format thing. We need to make this just more streamlined from a general perspective for fans. I felt like it was very confusing to follow for a lot of people. They tried in some aspects, but there's only so much you can do when you're like only making a Twitter post, when you're relying on players to advertise the stream and occasionally a streamer. They've got to do more than that. They have to make this an easier process to follow. Remember how easy it was to just go on the Overwatch League website back in the day? Boom, all the games are right there, and there's even an OWL app. Now, I don't know logistically if that's even feasibly possible for them to make another app, but at bare minimum, maybe advertise your website a bit more, renovate it a little bit so it's easier to follow, and so people don't have to consistently rely on Wikipedia. People like having that easy mainstream source of information, and at times it felt missing. I want to see posts. I want to see videos. I want to see content about this stuff. I want constant plugs about the schedule from everybody involved from top to bottom. I want to see the streamers get more involved and the content creators. Have them advertise this stuff. Get them involved with events. Get them on the stream. Whatever it takes to get eyeballs on Overwatch esports. You've got to make it happen. Because how many times have I had to sit here and explain the schedule or not even understand myself what's going on, and I have to correct myself after making these videos? It's just ridiculous at times, man. Half the time, we don't even know where stuff's being streamed. We have A streams and B streams going on. We have the first day of events literally not being streamed at all in certain instances, having to rely on player POVs and the Bad Pachimara League and OBS Sojourn to do all the dirty work. We should always have consistent broadcast moving forward. We've got to move this in a better direction, even if it's scuffed. We have to have something official, because when you don't have the official stuff is when less people care. Some people are down to watch, co-streamers and also the player POVs if they're streaming their match on Twitch or whatever, but that's only a small minority, The next thing I'm hoping for is for the regular season to be a bit more balanced with less of these absurdly long breaks. I think just knowing that we're coming back in January, this won't be a problem. The regular season will probably go very smoothly compared to what we had last year throughout all the regions, but in general, I thought it was an issue this year. Remember what happened between Stage 2 and 3 when we had the Esports World Cup? It felt like forever. We need to have more things going on, whether it's the actual regular season taking up that time or small little separate tournaments. We got to have more of that action. It's always that downtime that really kills people, that destroys their interest, Also, I'm praying that we experiment a bit more with the actual in-game format, with the rulings, with map picks, maybe even with hero bans. I thought the Esports World Cup with that was really entertaining. It added a whole new dimension to the game. Super interesting to watch, and I think adding it into OWCS would be a pretty seamless fit since we've already practiced something like that a lot. That experimentation was a great success. It can help us avoid some of these super boring, stagnant metas, at least for like a map or two, Banning Malga, banning these super important meta heroes to help change things up slightly. Some variations in composition would be sweet, and we could get that on a more consistent basis, perhaps just saved for tournaments and LAN events. Even that would be really fine to me. I'm hoping they experiment a bit more with the rules. Clearly they can do that now. Now that we're not as streamlined with Overwatch League, we should be allowed to go through with experimentation. It is good for the game to see if change works or not. Speaking of change, I think we need to get some more teams involved that are outside of NA and EU in these big tournaments. I think it is an absolute crime that Korea is only getting 2 spots, / Asia. It makes zero sense to have the best region by a country mile only get 2 teams. It is ridiculous that Zeta Division, for example, got no opportunities just because Crazy Raccoon and Team Falcons literally exist. This was a damn good Overwatch team all year, and if they had a chance to participate in Dallas, if they were at DreamHack Sweden, they probably could have gone far. I think they've got to consider the changes there. Maybe you add more teams to this LAN. Maybe you consider getting rid of one team from like NA or EU for a change. I think it makes sense. Or if you add more teams, you can have a couple of teams do a first round bye. I think that makes the most sense. You got to give more love to Korea, give some more love to Japan. They're a region on the rise. Their level of play still needs to improve, but clearly they have a lot of support going on over there. They should have more avenues to play in these big lands as well. And hopefully we get China involved too. I understand there's some logistics that come with that stuff, but somehow, some way, we've got to find a way to make this work, man. It's just unfair to some of the best players in the world to have to sit on the sideline and have such limited opportunities, you feel me? And just to go over a couple of other main points, I'm hoping they make it easier for other teams to acquire players. I'm hoping maybe they even change that import rule from like 2 to 3. I wouldn't necessarily be opposed to that. I like the idea of spreading the talent out to other regions, giving these players other opportunities, especially these Koreans who only have 2 spots at the moment. Maybe that'll remain the same, maybe not, but like if they could play in NA and make it through on like a mixed team, I think that'd be really cool, and it could form another fun story. I think everybody deserves more chances to compete, and I'm hoping they get more support as well, because clearly some teams had a huge advantage over others like I've talked about before, like with Toronto and Twisted Minds and like Falcons. People have actual facilities. We need to see these other main teams get some kind of support. Again, something it seems like they're trying to address to a certain extent, but I want to see more of it, so all of these guys can actually play without feeling overly concerned. Other than that, I think that mostly captures my general thoughts on how OWCS went this year. To give you my honest rating, I'd give it like a 6.5 to around a 7 out of 10. It definitely wasn't bad. There were many moments that I found quite enjoyable, especially when I got to stream it with you guys, and there was certain content I liked making too, but at the same time it felt like some things were stale, and again, maybe it's just because I've been attached to OWL for so long, but this didn't quite capture that same magic. It wasn't nearly as captivating for me. Sometimes it was maybe a little difficult for me to watch for various reasons, and I don't know if that's going to change or not going into next year. I really hope it does, but there are some things that could be done a little bit better in my opinion to enhance the experience. And again, already seems like they're working on that, and I trust them to make it happen. I trust those guys. They're doing a good job over there. With that said, that wraps up my general thoughts and my review of the Overwatch Champion Series inaugural season and what just happened in the playoffs. Now I'm going to turn things over to you. Let me know what you guys think of how OWCS went this year. Give me your honest thoughts, what you liked about it, your criticisms. It's important to get this information out there because you never know who may be watching and reading the comment section chat. Your criticism, your feedback could go a long way in making OWCS even better in the years to come. And I'd also appreciate it if you could leave this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you're new, because we are far from done here. I should be having a best player for every hero video coming out in the near future for this first season of OWCS and some other content. The off season's coming up soon, so there'll probably be some recaps in that regard, so definitely subscribe if you want more of that stuff. We are nowhere close to done with Overwatch Champion Series, so get hyped for next season, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.